to watch your story. Today's guest is somebody that's very interesting, very, very interesting. She is a best-selling author, an international speaker, and an award-winning human rights consultant. Kylie Van Luyn is an experienced executive coach and consultant with over 14 years experience working with women from diverse backgrounds. Kylie really likes to and is very passionate about creating inclusive and supportive workplaces for women to thrive in their careers. She is an accredited psychotherapist, a Harvard Business School graduate, an emotional intelligence coach, an NLP master practitioner, and founding member of the International Strategic Psychotherapist Association. Did I tell you she was interesting or what? Welcome, Kylie. We're so glad to have you with us today.
Thank you, Judy. Lovely intro.
Well, I, uh, I'm always afraid I'm going to stumble over something or say someone's name wrong. I'm glad for once I think I got it kind of right.
You
It's so
got it.
nice to have you here with us. Now, you said you were in North Virginia right now, where the snow is falling and cold.
It's cold, but the snow sadly has stopped falling. So I think we've seen the last of the snow, but it was
Oh,
beautiful last week.
oh, okay. And you said your little doggy's got cold feet.
He does. It was his first time in the snow. He's very excited, but didn't
Oh,
really know what to make of it.
poor little thing. You've got an Australian accent.
I do. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
My family and I relocated to the US a little over 6 months ago from Sydney, Australia. So that's the
Really? Only
accent's still
6
very
months
strong.
ago?
Mm.
And you came from Sydney, Australia, right into the snow, did you?
No, we arrived on the 4th of July. So we arrived, I think, on the biggest day in the US, the biggest
Yeah.
celebratory day. But in where we live in North Virginia, it was absolutely sweltering. So the humidity and the heat, even for an Australian, it was pretty unbearable. So I'm welcoming this cold weather at the
Oh,
moment.
good. Okay, good. Well, we want you to be happy here in our country, so you'll plan to stay. So tell us, what are some of the lessons that you've learned that you can share with us since you launched your business? And tell us what kind of business it is that you launched.
So my company is Elevated Coaching Consulting Global. I founded the company in Sydney, Australia, back in July 2021, and then expanded into the US market a year later. And then 6 months after launching in the States, my family and we made the decision that we needed to be here. I needed to be here to build the team, and you just can't build those connections and build a team remotely. So that's a very short snapshot of, I guess, the journey so far. But we do a bunch of different coaching programs. We do a lot of work with women, and most of our women. Well, not most of them. A lot of the women that we work with are refugees and migrant women. We partner with nonprofits both in the US and in Australia to co-design those pre-employment programs and career
Mhm.
coaching programs to empower those women that are newly arrived to either the US or Australia to pursue whatever that career journey looks like for them and give them that financial freedom and independence. But we do a bunch of consulting as well. So we do business consulting, and we do a lot of consulting and supporting of nonprofits.
It sounds wonderful. And so, what are some of the lessons that you learned in launching your business?
Oh, it's funny. I was reflecting on some of this before I jumped in, and over the last almost 3 years, a couple of the things that I've learned is that you're enough, and you have to truly believe that you're enough. And although you're enough, you can't do everything on your own. So for me, it was a pretty steep learning curve to putting that value on finding my tribe and my network, my support system in business, who are like-minded business owners. I found that was absolutely crucial, and nobody can teach you those things. You have to learn it as you're going, as I'm sure you have, Judy, as well. And business ownership, I always say, it can be like leadership. It can be quite a lonely place at times. So it's really great to know who are those people in your network who understand you, who can hold space for you, but also who might have walked that path before you. So that's, I guess, one lesson. Another one would be that vulnerability isn't weakness. and that was a big one for me, is that being vulnerable and being authentically yourself,
Yeah.
it's not a weakness, and neither is asking for help and support when you need it.
I think
That
so
was
many women are afraid to ask for the help and support. Because they don't want people to see them as weak. And so
Yeah,
that's a great lesson learned, isn't it?
it is, and I think that we try, most women in business, and I think most women in general, right? We try and hold the fort, either at home, with our children and our families, at work, in our business, and we don't want people to see that we are vulnerable and that we might be struggling. And it takes a lot for us to ask for help. But that would probably be my third one: is ask questions, ask lots of questions. Um, from nearly 3 years ago when I launched in Australia to expanding into the US, I had to ask a lot of questions when I expanded and scaled into a completely different country and a totally different market. And sometimes you don't even know the questions to ask. But finding those trusted advisors in,
Mhm.
your accountants and lawyers, very important. And so those would be some of the key things that I would say is, don't be scared to ask questions. Don't be scared to be vulnerable and ask for help. Get comfortable saying no as well. That was a big lesson for
Oh,
me.
that's a big lesson. So
Yeah.
many women need to learn that lesson.
Yeah. And say no without feeling like you have to explain why you're saying no.
Mhm, mhm.
No is a complete sentence, and it's okay as a woman that we don't have to explain it away. We can
Right.
say no, and it doesn't mean that we're not a good person and we're not kind and we're not soft and all of those beautiful things. We can say no, but getting comfortable saying no was a big thing for me over the last 3 years.
I
Um,
used to teach women 4 and 5 different ways to say no, and they were always in my seminars, they would be like, "Oh, I didn't know I could say that to someone."
right? It's such an uncomfortable thing. We think that just by saying no, um, that we're not being, I guess, how some of us have been raised. A lot of women have been raised that young girls and women, we have to be polite and we have to be a certain way, and saying no sometimes we think can be abrasive or abrupt. But I had to get comfortable and learn to be comfortable saying no. Um,
Were you taught as a child, like I was, that you shouldn't ask questions? If people want you to know something, they'll tell you?
mhm.
I
Yeah,
was I was
served me
taught.
very well.
Yeah, and it made it so hard for me in business because I didn't ask questions. That's been a big lesson learned, is to learn how to ask questions.
Yeah. And for me, it was asking the right questions. That was the other thing for me, especially when we relocated and we expanded into the States, was people aren't going to offer you information and advice. Um, Otherwise, you'll get an invoice. You have to, or a bill.
Sure.
You have to understand what is it that you need to know, and be comfortable as a woman being direct about asking direct questions to get the answers that you need to make an informed decision.
What have been some of the challenges that you've had?
Oh, there's been a lot in business, but I think probably the biggest challenge for me in my business was launching the business. Not too far after the pandemic, and also in Australia we had, I think, globally one of the harshest lockdowns, or multiple lockdowns. So that was difficult. Making the decision to start the business was also part of that challenge, and expanding the business into the US, and then the relocation. All of that there were challenges.
Mm,
I'd be lying to say there wasn't, but within those challenges there were lots of lessons. But I guess personally, the two biggest challenges or challenging times has been losing my mum to cancer 2 weeks before my 23rd birthday. That was probably
I'm so
the
sorry.
absolute, yeah, that was definitely probably one of the two most challenging times in my life, where grief and loss are
Mhm.
such complex emotions. Um, and enormous emotions, and everybody goes on their own journey through those times. And the second one would definitely be my divorce and custody battle, and what followed was my daughter at 3.5 being kidnapped essentially for 10 days, and I had no idea where she was.
Ooh,
Um,
that's
so
gotta be
there's Yeah, those would be. I would have to say that those would be the three biggest challenges that I've experienced in my almost 44 years of living.
Well, they are big challenges and they're life challenges, and at some point or another, they are going to step into our lives and we're going to have those challenges. So the amazing thing is what you do about it, how you come out of it, how you continue on. And you've evidently done pretty well with handling all of that. But I know that grief is something that isn't talked about all that much, but it's very difficult. I lost my mother 2 weeks after I moved from America to South Africa. And that was one of the hardest times of my life. And I felt so guilty because I had just moved and then she unexpectedly passed away. That grief is a very difficult thing, very difficult to go through.
Oh, absolutely. And no, there's no rule book, Judy, is there, around how
Yeah.
to navigate grief in the best possible way, or how to shorten the length of time you're grieving. Um, and with each loss, you grieve differently, even because they're
Yes,
different
you do.
people and different relationships, and at different times in your life when you lose people or you go through that grief. Um, you perhaps have different levels of emotional intelligence, so it may help. I mean, had I lost my mum at this age, 21 years later,
Mhm.
it would have been utterly devastating and still had a huge, enormous impact on my life. But I think the emotional intelligence I have now through life experience, I may have dealt with it differently.
Yes,
It's just part of life and learning, isn't it?
it certainly is. So, what motivates and drives you to do what you do in life, to have a coaching program, to have a business, to be out there making things happen?
I think the catalyst for change, or the catalyst for me leaving my career as an employee and a leader, an executive, and finally having the courage to start my business, was the workplace environment and the things that I experienced and others around me were experiencing at the time. So, a real lack of psychological safety, lots of people experiencing psychological injuries in the workplace. Um, and I've always been very passionate and driven about supporting individuals and organisations to reach their full potential and thrive. And that essentially is the mission of my company now. But I've always been purpose driven. So I've always needed to feel the impact of my work, not just sit in an office as an executive or a leader and read about the impact through reports and things like that. So I can say with absolute certainty that I'm driven by the belief that I have inside me that I was born to make a difference in the world, um, and making the difference, either working with our corporate clients through our consulting services, helping them to create more inclusive, diverse, and psychologically safe workplaces, or working with individuals that need our support in our coaching programs for them to reach their full potential and thrive. It's feeling that impact and knowing that at the end of every single day, my work has contributed to um, changing people's lives for the better.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. What if someone doesn't know their purpose? What if they're like one of my clients, come 35 years old and said, I don't have a purpose. I don't know my purpose. How do you help them find that?
I would say give them similar advice to, I guess, how I discovered my purpose, which was I was 40 years old. I thought I knew what my purpose was. I thought it was working in nonprofits. I'd been in that sector for 14, almost 15 years. I thought my purpose was to become a CEO of a national Australian nonprofit and continue making a difference through influence and having a seat at the table, essentially. But it wasn't until I looked back and reflected on my own life experiences and my journey, and also when I went through my training as a psychotherapist and an emotional intelligence coach, that I realized that what I had thought were my core values my whole life were not. And that was the beginning of actually discovering what my purpose was doing that exercise and reflecting on at finding out what my core values actually were. And my three top core values were freedom, connection, and purpose. And so it all made sense to me then, Judy, because I'd been so restless in my career, wanting something else, not knowing what that something else was, and just thinking that, I was just being restless and impatient. but it was because I was seeking freedom, which is essentially what I've been able to give myself um, in starting my business. So my first piece of advice to anybody sitting thinking, I want to feel excited again when I wake up in the morning. I want to be excited about the work that I do, and I want to find more meaning and fulfillment and alignment in my work. I would say do that exercise and really dig deep and identify what your core values are, because if your work doesn't align to those, um, and your life and how you're living your life and how you're showing up in the world, then you're probably not going to find out what your purpose and your why is.
Exactly, exactly. I remember when I was a teenager, my father sat me down one day because I was throwing a fit about my hair, and he said, "Is that how you want to be remembered, for having nice hair, or would you like to be remembered for behaving in a better way?" And it really, we spent the afternoon talking about it, and he made me write out my purpose at 16 years old and decide what I wanted my tombstone to say.
Mm,
And but the thing I loved about it was, once I found my purpose, it gave me a North Star, because when you find your purpose, it's like, this is the path you're on. And if somebody comes along and wants you to do something different from what your purpose is, you have a perfect way of saying no.
yeah,
It's perfect, because you say, no, that doesn't fit in with my purpose. Uh, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this.
yeah, that's right.
Which
And
answers.
doesn't it
Go ahead.
and doesn't it help you so much more? It's almost like you take the blinders off when you realize what your purpose is, and it's so much easier to make decisions across all aspects of your life. And you feel that I felt a huge sense of calm at 41 years old, because I thought, oh, this is the missing piece.
Uh-huh.
And it just, everything was better. My mindset improved, and the business was easy to start because it all just made sense. It's hard to explain, but there's that deep sense of knowing where you're going when you find your purpose.
Did you find that your background and experience and education and all those things all of a sudden started to come together and
Oh,
say, yes,
Judy,
you're hot?
it never made sense to anyone but me, but truly made sense to me when I was really clear on my purpose. Because for a good, I would say, almost 10 years of my career, I was doing a lot of contract work and short term projects and engagements. And everybody in my life but my dad, my beautiful dad, sort of questioned my career decisions, like, why are you leaving that job? And why are you only going for short term contracts? And that won't do you any good, climbing the ladder or on your CV. And my dad just said, you know what you're doing. And I just said to him, I don't know why, but I know this is what I have to do. These decisions just, they're intuitive and they feel right. I can't and I shouldn't need to explain them. But now, after almost 3 years, I realize that every single job I took, every bit of experience I gained, all the skills I learned, just was this creation of a toolkit that I now use every single day in the company.
Mhm, mhm, and it all somehow comes together at some point, and you just go, "Whoa, that's a light bulb, huh?" We just wake up to the fact. Now you're going to be a speaker at the Women Thrive Conference in March 18th to 23rd, I think it is, and
Yeah.
that's a summit. It's actually a Women Thrive Summit online. And what are you speaking about there?
Well, similar things to what we're talking about here, actually. My talk is Step Into Your Greatness, and it's around how purpose and mindset fuel success. So it's all about exploring your core values, understanding them, understanding the role that adopting a growth mindset has in business and in life, and definitely how it plays a big role in long term sustainable success. Yeah, that's what mine's all about. Be unpacking a whole bunch of really fun stuff, and how to discover what your true purpose is, and hopefully find more fulfillment and alignment across all those areas of your life.
Well, that's definitely something a lot of people I know are going to want to go and hear. We don't know the times or the days we're actually on the summit yet at this point, do we?
I think mine, I just actually checked earlier this morning, and I think mine's now been popped in for the 22nd of March at 1 p.m. Eastern time.
Oh, okay, good to know. So 1 p.m. Eastern time, that would be like 10 o'clock in the morning Pacific time.
That's
So,
right. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I know that the ladies that I work with will probably definitely want to hear that. And so tell us a little bit about you and why you made that decision to move to the United States.
Oh, talk about intuitive decisions. I've been asked this question probably 100 times, I think, in the last 6 months.
Well, we're all
Um,
curious why
yeah,
people come here.
yeah, and it is a culture, not a culture shock. That's not the right word I would use, but both the English speaking countries, but the cultures are very different. The business culture is different. I love how Americans work and operate and collaborate. It's very different to the Australian business culture. It's very refreshing, but it was a long process because we were on. I'm on an investor visa, and my family are too with the company. But for me, I think I subconsciously always had the intention to expand to the States and abroad before I consciously knew. And there was just a few things in the early days of setting up the business, working with a marketing company, getting my website designed, when they asked me about the domain name for my website. And they said, oh, so it's .com.au. And I said, no, 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 I want .net. And the beautiful man that actually owns the marketing company back in Australia, he said to me, why .net? And I said, because I don't want to just be restricted to Australia. And this was just starting. Um, and there was a couple of other things that just, I think intuitively I knew that I always had that dream of, well, it was moving to New York actually. It could have been Carrie Bradshaw and that whole thing back in the 90s and 2000s. But I just had this love of the US every time I came here. And there was just a sense that the social issues that I know so well in Australia, I know those same issues exist here, but just on a much larger scale. And I wanted to make more of a difference. There's more people to support. And so we sat down as a family, my husband, my daughter, and I, and the pooch, and we said, if we're not going to do it now, then when? It's now or never kind of thing. And we all just decided, let's go on an adventure. Australia will always be there. We'll always be citizens. We can always go back. And so we did it.
Good for you. Good for you. That's what I did once. I ran away to Africa and I was only going to be there a year and I stayed 9.
Wow.
So, and I probably wouldn't have come home then except my brother got ill. But I think it's such a good experience to go and live in another country. Everything in Africa was very different than it is here. And most people didn't speak English, which really was a challenge for me. But I love Australia. I always thought that that would be a place to move to. I spoke once at the Sydney Opera House, and I was so impressed. It was so amazing, absolutely beautiful,
It's
really
beautiful.
beautiful.
Yeah.
So, what advice would you give to our viewers if they said, "I want to start a business, or I want to move to a new country, or I want to do something totally different with my life"? What advice would you give to them?
Don't let fear hold you back. That
I
would
love
be that would be the first one, is feel the fear and do it anyway.
Yeah.
We all know that we have fears. I do. I'm sure you do. We all have our things, that little voice in our head saying, "No, now is not the right time," or "You're not as good as other people," or "That's madness." Getting up and leaving your home country with a 15-year-old daughter and a dog in tow and a husband, and leaving your home country. But my whole thing about moving to the US and also expanding 18 months ago into the US market was, it's better to have tried and even failed than not tried at all. I couldn't get to the end of my life, Judy, and think I had an opportunity to do something I'd always dreamed of for at least 15 years, and I said no. And to not have a valid reason to say no, and to have never have known, that would have been far worse than coming and not liking it and returning home. So
Well, I don't think you're headed home anytime soon, are you?
no, I'm back in July, but back and forth a lot. But
Yeah, it
yeah,
looks
we love it here.
to me like you've got quite the career ahead of you here in the United States, from what I've heard about people who are using you for presentations and coaching. So we're glad to have you here. We are running low on time. I'm so sorry, because I know you've got a lot more to tell us. Could you tell my viewers, my audience, how they could get in touch with you, how they could reach you if they would like to do some coaching, or if they would like to find out if you could speak to a group or something along that line?
Absolutely. Well, it's good timing. They can find us on our website. It's just been relaunched. We've got our new 2.0 website. It's just launched just after the holidays, which is elevatedconsulting.net. Um, so they can find us there. Lots of information about all the work that we do. All of our podcasts and speaking engagements and things like that are also there, so they can have a look around and see. I'm also on Instagram under the company name as well, but and of course LinkedIn if people want to reach out
Mhm.
um, and send me a message or just connect on LinkedIn. Those are the three best ways.
And you have a podcast they can listen to?
No, I haven't got a podcast, but I've been on a lot of podcasts. So
Mm.
there's a few different topics that I typically talk about. But if people want to sort of listen and hear about, in more detail about some of the work that we do across Australia and the US and now the UK, they can have a look at those on our website.
Great. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank
I
you, Judy.
really appreciate it. You've been wonderful, and I hope you'll come back and be with us again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you. And thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have Kylie Van Luyn as my guest. She's a delightful young woman who's moved from Australia, as you heard, to the United States, and she's expanding her business even into the UK. So those of you around the world who are out there, you can check her out on Instagram or under elevated consulting or you can go to elevatedconsulting.net. Thank you for being with us. Join us again for another one of our shows later this week. And I want to say, if you have a story that you would like to have told, let me know about it. I'd be glad to listen and definitely consider you for a guest on the show. So we're at WWDBTV. Thank you for joining us.